There's something about the open road that feels freeing. Endless highways, the hum of tires on asphalt, the promise of adventure. But sometimes the road can lead to places you never wanted to go. Tonight, I'll share 3 true stories of road trips that took a terrifying turn. These aren't just stories, they're warnings, because sometimes the scariest things happen when you're far from home, with nowhere to run.
It was a cold, moonless night when Sarah decided to take the shortcut home. The highway was empty, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the only person left in the world. That's when she saw him, a figure standing on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. Against her better judgment, she pulled over. He climbed into the back seat without a word. Sarah tried to make small talk, but he just stared out the window, his face hidden in shadow. Then, in a voice that didn't sound quite human, he said, "You shouldn't have stopped." Before she could react, he was gone. Sarah never saw him leave, but when she got home, she found a single muddy handprint on the back of her seat. And in the rearview mirror, she swears she saw his face, smiling. Mark was driving through the desert when he saw her, a woman in a white dress, standing in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes, but when he got out to check, she was gone. Shaken, he continued driving. Hours later, he saw her again. This time, she was closer. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Mark sped up, but no matter how fast he drove, she kept appearing, closer each time. Finally, he pulled over, trembling. When he looked in the rearview mirror, she was in the back seat. He screamed, but when he turned around, she was gone. Mark never drove through the desert again. Emily was on a cross-country road trip when she picked up a hitchhiker. He seemed normal at first, but as they drove, he grew increasingly agitated. "You need to turn back," he said. "This road, it's not safe." Emily laughed it off, but the hitchhiker's fear was contagious. Finally, he demanded she stop the car. As he got out, he leaned in and whispered, "They're watching you." Emily drove off, shaken. Hours later, she saw headlights behind her. They followed her for miles, never getting closer, never falling behind. When she finally reached a gas station, the car was gone. But as she filled up her tank, she noticed something scratched into the side of her car. They're still watching. After the hitchhiker disappeared, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She started seeing him everywhere, in the corner of her eye, in her dreams. One night, she woke up to find muddy footprints leading from her front door to her bed. She moved out the next day, but she still hears his voice sometimes, whispering, "You shouldn't have stopped." But not all road trip horrors involve strangers. Sometimes, the danger comes from places you'd never expect. It was supposed to be a fun detour. A group of friends, driving through the mountains, decided to explore an abandoned town they found on the map. At first, it seemed harmless, just crumbling buildings and overgrown streets. But as they walked deeper into the town, they began to notice things. Shadows moving in the windows, faint whispers carried on the wind. And then they saw it. A figure standing at the end of the street watching them. They ran back to the car, but as they drove away, they realized something was following them. In the rearview mirror, they saw dozens of figures standing in the road, watching them leave. They never went back, but they still wonder, who were those people and why were they watching? It started with a wrong turn. A family, driving through the countryside, took a shortcut that led them to an abandoned town. The streets were empty, the buildings crumbling. But as they drove deeper into the town, they began to notice strange things. Cars parked in driveways, their windows smashed, doors hanging open, swaying in the wind. And then they saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, waving at them. They swerved to avoid it, but when they looked back, it was gone. They never found their way out of that town. The town was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. As they walked through the streets, they began to notice things. Shadows moving in the windows. Faint whispers carried on the wind, and then they saw it. A figure standing at the end of the street watching them. They ran back to the car, but as they drove away, they realized something was following them. In the rearview mirror, they saw dozens of figures standing in the road, watching them leave. They never went back, but they still wonder, who were those people and why were they watching? They ran back to the car, their hearts pounding. As they drove away, they realized something was following them. In the rearview mirror, they saw dozens of figures standing in the road, watching them leave. They never went back, but they still wonder, who were those people and why were they watching? After escaping the town, they tried to find out what happened there, but the more they researched, the more questions they had. The town had been abandoned for decades, but there were no records of why. No one could explain the figures they saw, and no one could tell them why they felt like they were being watched, even now. The truth was worse than they imagined. The town had been abandoned after a series of disappearances. People would go there and never come back. The authorities never found any answers, but the locals whispered about something in the town, something that watched and waited. The friends never went back, but they still feel like they're being watched, even now. But sometimes, the scariest road trip horrors happen closer to home. It started with headlights in the rearview mirror. A family, driving home at night, noticed a truck following them. At first, they thought nothing of it. But as the miles stretched on, the truck stayed with them, its headlights blinding in the dark. They tried to lose it, but no matter how fast they drove, it stayed right behind them. Finally, they pulled over, hoping it would pass. But the truck stopped too, its engine idling. They sat there, frozen, until the truck suddenly sped off. They never saw it again, but they still wonder, who was in that truck and what did they want? The truck was relentless. Its headlights burning into the rearview mirror. They tried to lose it, swerving down side roads, but it stayed with them, always just a few car lengths behind. Finally, they pulled over, hoping it would pass. But the truck stopped too, its engine idling. They sat there, frozen, until the truck suddenly sped off. They never saw it again, but they still wonder, who was in that truck? And what did they want? They were almost home when the truck appeared again, its headlights blinding in the dark. This time, it swerved into their lane, forcing them off the road. They skidded to a stop, their hearts pounding. When they looked up, the truck was gone. They never saw it again, but they still feel like they're being watched, even now. After the truck disappeared, they reported the incident to the police. But without a license plate or description, there was nothing they could do. The family never drove that road again, but they still feel like they're being watched, even now. The open road can be a place of freedom, but it can also be a place of fear. These stories are reminders that danger can lurk anywhere, even in the most ordinary places. So the next time you're on a road trip, remember these tales and ask yourself, what's out there, watching you from the dark? If you've ever had a terrifying road trip experience, or if you have a story of your own, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more chilling tales.